Illinois' primary is next Tuesday. We'll take a look at some of the interesting races around the state. That's up next on Capitol View. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Capitol View, the show where we talk about Illinois government and politics. I'm your host, Jamey Dunn with Illinois Issues Magazine, and with me today is Chris Wetterich, State House Bureau Chief for the State Journal-Register.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Mike Riopel, State House Bureau Chief for the Daily Herald.
Hi,
Mike,
Jamey.
thanks
How
for
are you?
coming. So we got our primary coming up next week, very exciting, and there's a lot of interesting races going on around the state, so we're just going to kind of cut to it and jump into some of those races. Chris, I wanted you to start us off with some of the local races that are going on here. We're looking at the 49th House District. This has made a lot of news. It's been a pretty interesting race so far.
It's the 96th House District.
Oh, sorry.
The 49th is one of the Senate districts. No, you're fine. The 96th House District features three candidates in the Democratic race. Winston Taylor, who is a former NFL football player and state legislative liaison, Sam Kamen, who's a Ward 5 alderman from the city of Springfield, and Sue Shearer, who's a teacher. And interestingly enough, she's the one candidate in the Democratic race backed by House Speaker Michael Madigan, a very, very powerful speaker and chairman of the Democratic Party in Illinois. His organization and Shearer, and most of this was paid for by the House Democrats, have been lambasting Kamen on a regular basis over his various legal problems that he's had over the years. It's safe to say Kamen has more baggage than a United Airlines flight. I mean, but they have really been laying it on thick. And Kamen has kind of responded in the last couple of days trying to get some free media. There's been stories about how Shearer does not live in the district. Currently, she lives just about maybe 4 or 5 houses away from the district lines. She said she's going to move into the district. So it's become a very bloody race. I think that Shearer has probably got the edge here just because of Madigan's backing, but never underestimate the backlash downstate from being associated with the speaker, who's from Chicago and kind of generally regarded as a guy who, you know, hasn't done too much good for the state in the last couple of years.
Well, and Kamen is a Springfield alderman. He has a base. He's been around for a while, right?
In fact, this is a district that stretches from downtown Springfield to the city's east side, kind of through the rural parts of central Illinois between Decatur and Springfield, and it takes in most of the city of Decatur. So it's definitely a more Decatur central district, but the parts of the district from Springfield are in Kamen's ward, more or less. So a lot of people are aware of him and they know his voting record. He's kind of a very progressive-looking Democrat in terms of the issues. This is downstate Illinois, so he does favor concealed carry, but otherwise he's pro-choice. He's pushed a number of reform issues to the front. Shearer, you know, we have a hard time telling what she is. She does not give a lot of interviews. She refuses to answer questions on the phone. She requires reporters to send her an email. So it's harder to get kind of a back and forth going with her, but she's opposed the tax increase that was passed last January. So she's kind of trending to the conservative side of the Democratic Party and trying to take away, you know, there's not a lot of issues that, you know, Kamen could hit her on. Taylor's a kind of a wild card. He's also from Decatur. He's a Decatur native. He's lived in Springfield. He's been kind of running a low-profile campaign, I think. Also very hard to get a hold of him on the phone. Kamen also refuses to kind of answer questions via the phone. He'll try to email you back. So it's a race where everybody's got some baggage and they're trying to win with the minimal amount of media scrutiny as possible.
Well, and Mike, this is a democratically drawn district, correct? I mean, it was drawn with the intent of a Democrat holding that seat eventually.
Yeah. I mean, every 10 years the districts get redrawn, and given the population changes, the Democrats still can look to places where they can maybe make some inroads. You know, Springfield has generally been represented in the House by Republicans. Now they believe they're drawing in the east side of Springfield plus the city of Decatur, not any rural areas around Decatur, have drawn, and then a thin strip kind of connecting the two of them. You kind of lump a bunch of Democrats in together and maybe pick up a seat that you couldn't previously have done.
It was intended to be an urban district, even though it is connected by rural areas, but there's very few people that live there, so it's a district that they've designed, you know, to win. And you know, the speaker has faced Kamen before. Kamen ran in the 99th House District, which is held by Raymond Poe, in 2006. And Canman beat the guy that the speaker preferred and the guy that the Sangamon County Democratic Party and the late Mayor Tim Dallin preferred, which was, his name was Chuck Redpath. He was a Springfield alderman as well. So Canman has beat that organization before, and I think the negative mailers are kind of an insurance policy. They don't want him as their nominee going into this seat that they think that they should win.
Well, in looking at this map having been redrawn under the Democrats, there's a lot of really bloody battles going on between Republicans who were drawn into districts together or maybe drawn out of their district that they currently hold, and they're jumping into another district to try to fight for their political lives. So some of those that we're looking at are kind of in your area, Mike. One of the ones that's getting the most attention is the Senator Pankow with Representative Randy Raimi challenging her for a Senate seat. Can you tell us a little bit about that race?
Yeah, I mean, in DuPage County, which is traditionally a very Republican area, the districts were drawn to create a lot of shakeups. You know, there were 3 House people drawn into one district. Raimi, Representative Randy Raimi was drawn in with a different House member who left, and now another House member is moving over there. So you have a huge shakeup. So this Randy Raimi, a House member, is challenging Senator Carol Pankow, and it has gotten personal. Raimi is the county chairman up there. It's the second biggest county in Illinois. It's a big Republican operation to be in charge of. And Pankow on the other side has brought a lot of her own money into the race and has been up on cable television since Thanksgiving and sent a ton of mailers. They differ on some issues like gambling and pensions and all that typical stuff, but it's mostly gotten personal with Pankow attacking Representative Raimi about his DUI conviction last year. And she's run TV ads with the police video in it to attack him over it. They've been very, very harsh, and I think people still believe that race will be pretty close because you have 2 known names in the area going against each other, and voters know them both. They're getting mail from both sides that are negative, so it should be a pretty close race.
Those ads are definitely becoming kind of infamous on Raimi's DUI, but he has come out and said, you know, I made a horrible mistake. He's not the first legislature to have an indiscretion such as a DUI. How much damage do you think they're really doing up there? Yeah,
I mean, he's probably done himself some favors by last year, even before this race was even really rolling. As soon as the DUI came out, he apologized. He's been upfront about it. He's even carrying some legislation in the House relating to DUI offenses. He's kind of, I think, maybe tried to blunt the criticism by talking about it, by apologizing, by not trying to hide anything and letting his opponent, saying that he's hiding from it. He apologized. So, yeah, I mean, still, the ad is harsh. I mean, he's not apologizing on the ad. The ad is made to be harsh and to make him look bad. So it probably will be effective to some extent.
And then it seems the other big issue in that race that's actually an issue is pensions. Raimi has taken money from teachers' unions. He's backing not making drastic changes to the pensions, whereas Pankow is backing a plan that some folks feel is kind of a drastic plan. So will that say a lot about this issue, depending on which one is elected, or do you think it's playing a lot?
I wonder how much voters pay attention to that, especially when you have these harsh ads out there. And I mean, both candidates have said, we just talked to him last week, that neither one thinks voters have really started paying attention to issues and that kind of thing until the last couple of weeks. There are certainly a lot of teachers in the suburbs. How many of them vote in Republican primaries, I don't know, but they would tend to prefer, I think, Raimi's take on things, and certainly Pankow's take on things more lines up with the Republican establishment view.
And then the other race that's kind of in your paper's neck of the woods is Representative Chris Nybo versus Senator Kirk Dillard, both well-known Republicans. Again, they don't have a lot of differences when it comes to issues, do they?
They split on gambling pretty drastically. Dillard favors slots at Arlington Park and other racetracks, and Nybo doesn't. A lot of their split has been Nybo is a freshman, Dillard is a longtime lawmaker and chief of staff for 2 governors. Nybo is playing the role that I think a lot of voters appreciate at a time when they're kind of sick of how things are being run. He's kind of playing the role that I'm new, this guy has been around for a while, and of course the other side is Nybo's only been there for less than 2 years. Dillard's been in the legislature for a much longer time, has a lot of experience, has done a lot of things. So that's a pretty textbook, new guy, fresh blood matchup versus the veteran, experienced lawmaker.
Well, and there's another kind of closer to home in this area Republican race going on in the Senate that is drawing a lot of attention. Senator Sam McCann, who is currently seated in the Senate, has a challenger, Knohl, who is backed by one of the outgoing senators. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about this race as well?
Yeah, this is another product of redistricting. The 50th Senate District, which stretches from Springfield to the Mississippi River. That is a district that current Senator Larry Bomke lives in. Bomke decided to retire rather than run in so much new territory that he would have had to face. McCann, who actually lives in a different Senate district, just maybe a stone's throw away from the 50th, plans to move into the 50th, but that is where he's running from. Now, most of this, the population center in this district is Springfield, and Sangamon County Republicans recruited a guy named Knohl, who is a member of the Springfield Park Board, to run in this district. He's also, I believe, an assistant state's attorney, or was at one point. I'm not sure if he still is. But this is a case where the Sangamon County Republicans, they are infighting over the chairmanship, or with their chairman, Tony Libri, and I don't think that they've been able to really give Knohl the support that he needs to overcome McCann's organizational advantages. McCann represents a lot of the 50th district now. A lot of it is his territory, and so he has wrapped up the endorsements of the other county chairmen other than Sangamon County's chairman. So it's a very, very steep uphill climb for Knohl to win this race.
Knohl has been backed by Larry Bomke, though, who is a pretty well-liked guy, going out.
The entire Sangamon County establishment backs Knohl. Earlier in the race, there was another Springfield alderman in this race, Steve Dove, and he eventually dropped out, but his name is still on the ballot. So people who are confused or haven't paid attention to the race or know that Dove is out might vote for him. So this was kind of a big failure on their part to really get him out of the race before it got too far along. So it's a steep climb for him. I think McCann wins.
Something for our Springfield viewers to note, that he is no longer in the race, but will be
on
the ballot.
You can't vote for Steve Dove.
So
you can,
yes, you can, but it won't make a lot of difference.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to there's also tons of congressional races going on next week that are going to be pretty interesting. One is looking kind of similar to this Senate race in that one candidate has a lot of backing from the establishment. The other candidate is getting some high-profile kind of backing from Tea Party folks. And I'm talking about Adam Kinzinger and Donald Manzullo's race. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about that race and what's going on?
Yeah, Kinzinger is a freshman, originally from Bloomington, kind of moved up toward the south suburbs and beat Debbie Halverson 2 years ago, who is also a freshman, Democrat, to get into Congress. So he lives in the south suburbs. Manzullo lives sort of in the Rockford area. I mean, not in Rockford or anything. But again, they have been forced by the map to square off. And it's another sort of textbook. New guy, Kinzinger, Air Force veteran, kind of backed by Representative Aaron Schock, who's also very young, kind of new blood type guy. And then Manzullo, who's been in Congress for a very long time, is known by a lot of people. And there's been a lot of ads and a lot of bickering about who's the most conservative. I mean, that's one of the big, all the issues aside, when they talk, that I'm the most conservative, and it's like we talked about earlier, Kinzinger's young, hasn't been around very long. Manzullo is a veteran of Congress.
And polling that's come out recently shows them basically tied, right?
Yeah, it should be another close one. I mean, there are a lot of races, a lot of years you can kind of predict these races okay. But these are more difficult, first because they're close, second they're both incumbents, and third because, this is our first year in these new districts. We don't know the districts as well as maybe we knew the map that's been in place for 10 years.
Well, and we keep talking about folks running in a district that they don't live in. Chris, can you explain a little bit why that's happening now and how that works?
In Congress, you can run in any district you want. You don't have to live there. That's the way the Constitution works, and you can continue not to live there. In the state of Illinois, when we have redistricting, the lines all get changed. So if you, basically what the rule is if you live in a district now that overlaps with a new district, you can run in that new district even if you don't live there. If you want to run for re-election, though, you have to move there within 6 months. And most politicians do want to run for re-election eventually, so they end up eventually moving in there. It's when these new district lines, I'm not sure how big of a deal it is that some of these guys don't and gals don't live in the same district that they're running in. I think people understand gerrymandering. They understand the politicians draw the lines for a reason. So I think that newcomers who want to run in a different district than they live, I don't think the voters are going to have too much of a problem with it.
Well, and you'll see cases even when someone has intentionally been drawn out of a district.
Absolutely.
Where the line has been drawn around their house so they're no longer in the district.
It happens all the time. It happens every 10 years. And it's just, as long as we have politicians drawing the districts after the census, that's going to happen.
Well, one other congressional race, Mike, that I'd like to touch on with you just a little bit is the Tammy Duckworth race. That's getting a lot of attention. Can you give us a little background on what's going on there? She's pretty well-known candidate, so people are watching that fairly closely.
Yeah, they're in the northwest suburbs, the 8th district. Tammy Duckworth and Raja Krishnamurthy. Duckworth ran in 2006 against Peter Roskam in one of the country's most watched, harshest, most expensive campaigns. Roskam eventually prevailed by a couple points and now is like the chief deputy whip or something like that in the House. So she's trying again to run for Congress. She's a former director of the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs, went to work for the Obama administration for a while. Krishnamurthy used to work in the Treasurer's office, I believe, in Illinois, and ran for comptroller in 2010. Came within within 1 percentage point of winning that race in a pretty hotly contested statewide primary. So they're both sort of well known, and they're both pretty good candidates. They don't differ on a ton of the issues, but they're both trying to face Joe Walsh, who's a Republican, kind of become a national Tea Party figure. So that will probably be a big race in November too. Whichever of these two prevail, these kind of major Democratic candidates against a nationally known Tea Party candidate on the Republican side.
So we're probably going to see a lot of national money coming in for the general.
Yeah, there probably should be. Unless the polls show one or the other is way ahead, then the national parties won't get involved. But certainly both sides want to win that one. And
Duckworth is generally backed by the Democratic establishment, right? She's got Senator Dick Durbin on her side.
And she's got, some Obama people are behind her, and that's generally true. Yeah.
Okay.
Then one of the other districts we'd like to look at just a little bit, because we have some folks that are probably watching that are in this the 13th congressional district. There was a Democratic primary debate this week. Chris, you guys had a little bit in the SJR on this. Yeah. Can you give us a little rundown?
Yeah, the two candidates in this race are David Gill, who's an emergency room doctor from Bloomington. He has run races before, so he has a little bit of name recognition. And then Matt Gettin, who is the Greene County State's attorney. Gettin, like Tammy Duckworth, is backed by Senator Dick Durbin, and this is Durbin's kind of neck of the woods, so this is maybe his prestige or his judgment a little bit on the line here. So they debated last night, kind of like the Kinzinger-Manzullo race. This was who's more progressive, who's more Democratic. It seemed to be the way the debate goes. There was not a lot of disagreement. One thing that Gill has tried to hammer home against Gettin is that he does not take any money from political action committees, and he's tried to make this an issue in the race, saying that he'll be more independent if he gets to Congress because he doesn't have any of that dirty lobbyist money on his hands when he goes to take a vote. So. But
this isn't going to be an easy race in the general election. No. Will that perhaps hurt him going forward if he is the candidate?
There's always a question about candidates who kind of unilaterally disarm themselves like that. Whoever wins is going to face Representative Tim Johnson from the Champaign-Urbana area. This is a district, again, that the Democrats in the legislature drew that stretches from Springfield all the way over to Champaign. it's drawn to give a Democrat a chance, and whoever wins the nomination on the Democratic side probably does have a chance against Johnson, who has kind of steadily been moving to the center or even to the left on certain issues to kind of position himself well to run in this district. So I think this is not as hot as the suburban races, but I think it's a sleeper depending on how well President Obama can do, especially downstate Illinois. I mean, I'm sure he'll do very well in the suburbs and the city, but I'm not sure he's going to do as well downstate as he did in 2008.
Well, it looks like Illinois is going to play a factor in the Republican presidential primary, kind of an interesting development that we've all been wondering what if for a while now. Chris, can you talk a little bit about who the candidates are and,
Sure.
and what their appeals are, what people are looking for?
You know, it's kind of a classic downstate versus the suburbs in Chicago type of race. I mean, it depends on how much credence you give or how much influence Newt Gingrich is going to have. He spent some time in the state, so it's kind of unclear to me, you know, where he stands. But you know, the two leading candidates right now are, of course, Mitt Romney, who is way ahead of Rick Santorum in the delegate count. The general consensus seems to be that Rick Santorum will play very well downstate because he's socially conservative. People downstate, you know, they don't like abortion, they like guns. They're socially conservative people, so these are issues that Santorum will play well with. But he's also got an economic populism about him, and people downstate are not necessarily into the whole corporate country club republicanism that you might see in the suburbs, where Mitt Romney will, should do very well. He's considered the more moderate candidate, even though he's tried to play as much of the conservative base as possible. So, it depends on who gets their voters out and which parts of the state they come out in.
Well, Mike, you were kind of looking at this through the lens of the last gubernatorial and Senate race and how people voted that way. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, to get an idea of just how the state works politically, looking at 2010 in the statewide race, Mark Kirk was the more moderate candidate. He won his statewide race. Bill Brady was the more conservative candidate. He lost, and the difference was Kirk did better in the suburbs, basically, in the Chicago area. And so that's a traditional battleground, especially now that downstate, a lot of downstate Democrats are gone. It's even redder than it ever has been. So, yeah, I mean, Illinois will play a role, I think, in the momentum going forward, because like Chris has said, it's going to be a battle to all the way to the convention. And, if Romney picks up more delegates here or less by 1 or 2 or however many, and who wins by a couple points here or there, it's all about momentum, I think. And what are they talking about in Illinois right now? It's who won in Mississippi and Alabama, because of there were lots of conservative voters there and Santorum won. So after Illinois, they'll just be talking about the Illinois results in the next set of primary states. It's all about momentum. Can Santorum convince Gingrich to get out so he can be the one conservative candidate? And going forward, how is it going to work out delegates-wise between the top conservative and Romney? So Illinois is an important primary state, especially as far as it's just all about momentum going forward from here.
I can't help but think that Santorum has done himself some damage, though, in the Chicago suburbs. We have a lot of, Republican women who probably don't look so kindly on the stuff that he said about contraception and birth control. I think that he might have damaged himself. I mean, they're going to look at who won those other states, but I think that in their mind, they've noticed nationally what he said about those issues, and that's not going to play well in the suburbs. It might play better downstate, but there's just not as many voters downstate in the Republican primary as there will be in the suburbs.
And I think Santorum gets that. I mean, his big push is going to be on Friday in the suburbs. And where is he going to go? He's going to an evangelical church to have his big. So he's going to a public high school and then an evangelical church. I mean, I think he gets that. And you're right. I mean that the suburbs are more moderate, not his group of people, and he probably acknowledges that and wants to deal with it.
Yeah.
Well, and an important court decision came down this week that will affect how money flows into all of these races and kind of opens the door for what people are calling super PACs in Illinois. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about this decision?
Yeah, this is a result of kind of what at the time I thought was a strange provision in the campaign finance laws that were passed after the Blagojevich arrest and indictment. basically it restricted political action committees. It restricted how much money they could raise from individuals, corporations, other candidates. It's kind of an unusual thing at the federal level. We don't, they don't restrict how much money a PAC can raise. You can raise as much. I could write somebody $1 million. Well, I couldn't, but I could write somebody a PAC $1 million check tomorrow under the federal rules and have no problem. But under the state law that was passed in, I believe it was 2009, you couldn't do that. So what happened on, it was earlier this week. I can't remember the exact date, but there's a federal judge in Chicago who struck down those campaign finance limits. So now a PAC in Illinois can raise as much money as it wants. The other provision that was struck down was there was a provision in the law that allowed you to only have the same group of people to only have one PAC. You couldn't have one PAC for contributing to candidates and another to do independent expenditures. This changes that so that you can, so that we can see the kind of super PACs that have emerged elsewhere in the country can emerge here in state races as well.
So it will basically allow these groups to raise as much as they want and spend as much as they want, as long as they don't do it coordinated with a campaign. Right.
No, the coordination is the key. You can't call up Senator Smith and say, here's what I'm going to do in my ad for you. You have to do it on your own, and you can't talk to him basically and figure out what you want to do.
Okay, well, we have about 1 minute left. Former Governor Rod Blagojevich started his prison sentence today. Final thoughts on this chapter of Illinois history?
What a bizarre man. I mean, just watching his statement yesterday, I believe it was a 12 or 13-minute statement on the news. Local stations cut away after a while because he began to ramble about all the things he'd done for health care and old people. And I think he's just a guy that doesn't get it, and he never has. And he seemed to at the end of his statements, it was almost like a Schwarzenegger thing. I'll be back someday. I don't think he will. I think most of us are going to forget about him.
Well, and we're going to have to leave it at that. You'll hear more about the primary next week with some analysis and looking at who won and who lost and what that means. I'd like to thank my guests, Chris Wetterich and Mike Riopel, and I'm your host, Jamey Dunn, and tune in next week for Capitol View.